So why is consciousness fundamental as opposed to an epiphenomenon? So fundamental means that consciousness comes first and the reality emerges out of it. An epiphenomenon is basically a secondary kind of phenomenon that emerges out of matter. So in this view, material reality comes first, and then we have consciousness emerging out of it. And this is the preferred theory in the current scientific paradigm, which is that of materialism. There are also theories like the idealist theory, which considers that consciousness is fundamental, which have their place in the culture, but they are restricted, basically. So one proponent of that theory is Bernardo Kastrup, for example, and he's an idealist philosopher. But in academia, the current accepted view, or the view with more credit to it, is this epiphenomenon point of view, which basically claims that consciousness emerges out of matter. You have billions of years of cosmic processes and evolution, and then at a certain point, consciousness appeared in the world evolution. The idealist point of view claims the exact opposite. So, first you have consciousness, and then the world emerges out of it. And I came to support this theory. I was an atheist. I didn't believe in anything paranormal. I didn't consider consciousness to be fundamental, and so on. But after some years of reading esoteric literature and basically meditating on some symbols, I came to the conclusion that, well, it's the opposite. It has to be, because I took a simple symbol like the monad, and that's a symbol which you can find in all religions in different forms. So the cross, it's the same symbol, but it has a different form. The swastika, same symbol, different form. And I asked myself, well, why is this a symbol for God? And if you analyze the two components of that symbol, which is the point, firstly, and then you have the circle. Well, the point has 0 dimensions in Euclidean geometry. And the circle is a symbol for infinity. So you have basically the point, 0 to infinity. And why is the circle a symbol for infinity? Because, well, you start out with the simplest geometrical shape with 3 sides and 3 angles, and we are talking about a shape which has equal sides and equal angles, the triangle. Then you go to the next one, the square, and the next one, and the next one, and you'll see that you will need infinite shapes to get to the circle. So the circle is a geometrical shape which has infinite sides. That's why it's a symbol for infinity. While the point has 0 dimensions. It cannot be represented in 3 dimensions, in 2 dimensions, in 1 dimension, because it's 0 dimensional, which means that it's equal to nothingness, to 0. Yet, the paradoxical nature of geometry tells us that that 0, that point, is the basis for every single geometrical shape that exists and every single geometrical element that exists. So you start from zero and you go to infinity in that symbol. And if you analyze those traits in the monad, you'll see that they correspond with the qualities that are usually ascribed to God. So this is why it is a symbol for God. But not only for God, you have consciousness in there as well. So that point represents absolute transcendence, which is axiomatic in some sense. So you can call it also nothingness, but you can call it pure being. So it's kind of paradoxical, as the nature of the point is, because it's a zero, yet it builds up all the other geometrical elements. So you start from there. That's the starting point. That's God. That's consciousness. It's nothingness, basically. And you do not have any kind of experience if you consider just that. So you have your nothingness. That's equal to zero. And then you have the first, let's say, separation or division or opposition. And if we understand the definition of consciousness, well, consciousness is basically being aware of something. So you have an opposition, you have awareness of an object, and you have awareness of yourself being opposed to that object. So you have self-awareness and self-consciousness. And once you have that, you can say, well, I'm conscious of something, and you can say, I have consciousness. But if you do not have that kind of opposition, well, there's nothingness. And that's the starting point. The starting point is nothingness that then separates itself. There is opposition, and then you have basically reality opposed to consciousness, and you have experience. This is the basic metaphysics of consciousness in the idealist point of view. So another thing is that consciousness is universal. So that point is just one point. It's just one. It's not multiple. It's just one. It's the same in every single other person. So in the idealist view, you do not look at consciousness individually. Individuals have consciousness, but it's the same consciousness that is having different experiences. But the consciousness is universal, and universal doesn't mean that like we have the archetype of the body, which makes us with 10 fingers, like from a model. It's not universal in that sense that, well, we have the same kind of qualities because there's a model, there's a universal model, like in a Platonic sense. No, it's just one consciousness that is in all beings and which is separated by different means, physical means, mental means, and so on. And I say mental because I do not equate consciousness with the mind. So for me, they are two different and separate things. Because the mind is, let's say, the place where you have immaterial objects which you can perceive. And this is another problem that you will find in physicalism, basically. But before we get to that problem, I wanted to show you an argument of why consciousness is fundamental. Like, because I showed you the basic theory of the idealist position on this, which is kind of in accord with what Bernardo Kastrup said. Um, so imagine a world without consciousness. Like close your eyes, imagine a world without beings, without entities who are conscious and so on. You can do that. Yes, you can imagine a world that is basically a desert without any being. But is it without consciousness? The answer is no. And it's impossible to do that because you are the consciousness that is imagining that world. So you cannot imagine a world without consciousness. And this most probably is what we have also in physical reality. It's not just imagination, it corresponds also to reality itself. You cannot have a world without consciousness. You need an observer. There is always an observer. There is always consciousness that experiences reality. If you have nothing, there's no reality to be experienced, and so on. So, this is the argument for consciousness being fundamental. Now, to get to the mind problem, well, in physicalism, the mind is reduced to the brain, and not only in physicalism. Um, Also, in some versions of panpsychism, which is that theory which says that the universe is conscious, matter is conscious. So I'm thinking now about Philip Goff. So Philip Goff basically has a theory which, to my mind, looks a lot like pantheism. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think what he does is basically he accepts physicalism, but he just ascribes the mind to it. It describes a mind to matter, and he refuses to acknowledge that there are different layers to reality, which are immaterial. So again, he doesn't see consciousness in the correct way, and he doesn't see the mind in the correct way if he just accepts basic physics. And here I'm not saying that physics is wrong. I mean, physics is correct, but the problem is not in physics as it is, but in the limitation of the paradigm which is present in the scientific community. It's not physics. It's not the physics per se. So I think Philip Goff makes this mistake. I call it a mistake because I think it is. So I will now talk about why I think the mind is immaterial and it cannot be equated with the brain. But keep in mind, the mind is not the same thing as consciousness to me. So consciousness is that zero in the monad, and the mind is something that emerges out of that zero. So the mind cannot be reduced to the brain because thoughts, imaginations, fantasies, dreams, they cannot be observed there. You have brain activity, yes, but you also have brain activity when you are experiencing physical objects. So do you say, well, it's all in my brain and the physical object doesn't exist? No. You say, I'm having an experience. My brain is translating that experience, is receiving that perception, and so that I can have a real experience of a physical object, which I consider real. Why don't we do the same thing when we have a dream? Different reasons. So one of them is that dreams do not follow the same rules as physical reality. So if I die in a dream, I'm not dead because it's just a dream, as we say. Yet, this doesn't mean that the dream in itself, the perceptions that I'm having, do not have a real ontological status. This means only that those kind of experiences in dreams follow different rules from the ones in the physical world. So, why don't we apply, and I argue that we should apply the same logic that we apply when we are experiencing an object in the physical world. So we have that brain activity. People reduce the dreams to that brain activity that we have. But what about the experience of the dream? What about the perceptions and the objects of perceptions? Where are they? If we open up the brain, they are nowhere to be found because they are not in the brain. So we have to postulate that there is another realm which is ontologically real where that perception occurs. So I have that experience and I have brain activity that experience is giving me, but the experience in itself is totally real in an ontological sense. So many people will say, well, but dreams are just illusions. But I will ask, what are illusions? Because let's imagine that you are basically seeing a hologram. And it's a hologram of a tree. And you think, oh, there's a tree. And you go and try to touch it. And your hand goes through it. And you realize that, well, it's not a tree, it's a hologram. And what did just happen? Well, your idea of that perception was wrong. The perception was not wrong. I mean, you really saw that hologram, which looked like a tree, but you interpreted it in the wrong way. So, what is the ontological status of the hologram? Well, the hologram is still real. Same thing with the dreams. So, we have the wrong ideas about those perceptions, and we call them illusions, but the ontological status is real. I mean, people will still object to this, but I think this is a pretty strong case for the mind being immaterial. And if you want something more palpable and closer to, let's say, physical reality, we can go into extraordinary kind of experiences, because this is just in the ordinary life what I'm describing now. But you can look at remote viewing. Remote viewing is actually a real phenomenon. The DIA studied it with Project Stargate, led by Harold Puthoff, and well, the CIA then concluded that it's inconclusive. It wasn't useful. But if you listen to the people who worked on the project and people who practice it, well, they say it's real. They have the proof that it's real. They have from 65 to 80% accuracy on some of those experiments. And basically, remote viewing is the skill to describe or see, well, to see first and then describe any kind of, let's say, phenomenon that happens somewhere else physically, and you're doing this only with your mind, with your intuition. So some people were given geographical coordinates, just that, and they could describe the place just from that without knowing what that place was. So imagine if I give you the coordinates for Paris and you describe me the city and so on. That was the experiment, and it had a good success rate. I mean, it's not perfect, of course, it's not 100%, but it's pretty high. So this kind of phenomenon kind of proves that you that the mind and, well, its abilities can go beyond the physical limits of the brain and the body, because it's connected to something else. It's not material, and if it's not material, then it expands to more than the brain. And things that sound crazy, like telepathy, well, in this kind of paradigm, become possible. And I think we are hopefully approaching that kind of paradigm. So you do not need remote viewing and any paranormal thing to prove that the mind is immaterial. You can do it just by observation within ordinary consciousness. So this is the funny thing. You just need to view ordinary experience with different eyes. This is the whole thing. It's just a thing of ideas, of beliefs, and of mental systems, basically. A system of belief. If you have some objections to what I said, you can just leave a comment and maybe I'll address it. But it's useful also to see people with the opposite view reacting to this and what arguments they bring to the table, so that I can better my theory and maybe change my mind, but I don't think I will.